Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Nat, and I'm part of Exceptional Individuals. We support neurodiverse people into the workforce. I'm neurodivergent myself. I'm also currently doing my master's in neuroscience, and I support ND people every single day. So you're in good hands. And we have been doing a deep dive into neuroscience this last year. And we have been looking at the last few weeks in looking at how we learn, looking at what the brain is actually doing, different processes. Today, we are going to be looking at something called metacognition. Some of you may have heard it before, some of you may not, but it's a really interesting concept, and how it applies to autism in particular, I think is really interesting. We are mainly talking about education in general. However, we are going to be doing this through a neurodivergent perspective and lens. That is our agenda today. Here's myself showing that I've done stuff. I never feel the need of doing it, but people say, oh, mate, you look so young that everyone's going to think you don't know what you're talking about. So I have to show a little bit of credibility. So today I put a little jumper on with a thing. Makes me look like a professor. I'm not. However, if you do have any questions related to neuroscience or neurodiversity, fingers crossed, I'll know the answer, or at least I'll know how to get the answer. Metacognition, learning strategies, and neuroeducation. How can we better teach ourselves with the knowledge that we have about the brain? So we've got two parts today. We're learning about metacognition. A lot of you will know being neurodivergent is often about our cognitive functioning, about how our brain processes information. What about on a meta level? And we're not talking about Mark Zuckerberg here. We're talking about the OG meta. At the moment, we teach people because we've always taught people in a certain way. But what if we use our understanding from neuroscience and psychology in order to inform the way that we teach people? Psychology and education, they've been together for quite some time, but neuroscience and education, they haven't really gotten on that well. And today we're going to be seeing why is that and how we might be able to change that. Why do we even bother educating? Let's face it, kids are dumb. Jokes, but they take ages to learn. Why we even bother teaching them? What is the purpose? Why do we even bother educating? It takes time, it's effort, it's draining. Well, we do it to share knowledge because human beings love sharing knowledges. We love a good chit chat. No one likes backtracking. We've already learned it before. Why don't we share the knowledge so we can keep learning new things? To prepare children for the big wide world, yeah, it's brutal out there. We need to prepare for it. For their development, part and parcel, it's what we do. In the animal kingdom, a few seconds after coming out of the womb, they're already walking and talking. We take forever to develop. We've got basic human rights. Yeah, it's the right thing to do, to grow together, to share knowledge, prepare for the world. A lot of the themes I'm getting here is it's just the right thing to do. It's what we've always done. It's what we should do. We have a moral obligation and a societal obligation. Ultimately, we educate for a number of reasons. And this is going to set the good foundation about why it's even important today. Why do we educate? Well, a few reasons is education helps us to learn more and do better in school. Those things are not always synonymous. If how to educate, you'll do a better job in school. Good education can lead to better jobs and more money. The facts of life is we need to earn money. Being better at education will equal financial gain. This makes people happier and helps the economy. I had a little bit of an issue when I first wrote this. I was like, does it make people happier? Well, the studies do say, as long as you've got enough money to live, money does equal happiness. But then it's after that point, money doesn't equal happiness. Let's take, who's a rich fella? Amazon, Jeff Bezos, yeah. So Bezos, he's minted. If he was to double his wealth, it would make no difference to him. But for us, it would. Also the economy. There is a correlation between a good level of education and being physically healthy. It can help your income, resources, psychological benefits, health benefits, have a better neighborhood. There's plenty of reasons why learning is great. Remember, we're doing this from an ND perspective, and we know learning is more challenging for us. We know the benefits of education, but yet the education system is rigid and stiff and refusing to change. That's something that we've got to keep in our mind here. It's all well and good saying this, but what are we actually doing about it? Today, if we are successful, we're going to be looking at the following things. We're going to be looking at a bit of medical learning strategies and neuroeducation. Whether or not you're neurodivergent yourself or a teacher, understanding these things might help you retain information a little bit better. Let's start off with good old metacognition. I'm not going to say what it is just yet, but I'm curious, judging by the images and what you've seen so far, are you able to put in your own words what you think it is? Remember, this is anonymous, so just say what you want, but I'm curious to know about your own understanding on what it exactly is. Quite interestingly, when we talk about autism, we also talk about the theory of mind. It's quite interesting how theory of mind and metacognition overlap together. Theory of mind, for those who do not know, is the idea is that just because you can't see something doesn't mean you don't understand what is happening, where those on the autistic spectrum struggle. If you're on the telephone, if I said, hey, look at this dinosaur I got in my hand, but you would know that the person on the other end of the phone can't see. But someone with autism, typically at a young age, will be like, yeah, look at my dinosaur, it's amazing. If they struggle with that balance. Anyway, back to metacognition. We've got learning styles. Yeah, somewhat. Oh, unconsciously knowing. I would say is actually the opposite of unconsciously knowing. I think it is knowing you're knowing. For me, metacognition is always, it is thinking about thinking. If you are conscious and aware of your intuition and your instincts and your urges and your desires and your motivations, it's very much the awareness. How we interpret things, seeing the big picture, how our brain works. Well, let's take this image, because I think the image actually says it quite well. We've got, I know about learning to read. You're not just reading, you understand how you're reading. You're breaking the words down, you put them into pieces. I know how and when to use strategies and which ones to use. For instance, you're not just highlighting your work because why not? You're doing it because it makes it easier for you to read back later. I know and can demonstrate how to monitor my understanding. Doing a little bit of a check-in. Am I just reading or am I comprehending? So as you can see, it's I know. It's very much about the awareness. This is a really useful thing. Do we ever question, why am I finding this difficult? Why am I finding it easy? Why am I even bothered doing this? These are questions which can help inform learning. In short, metacognition is thinking about thinking. I know you start going like inception-y in your head. If I'm thinking about thinking, and I kind of like this GIF, I find it funny. There's a little monkey and it says, if you're happy in it, you have metacognitive awareness. You are aware of your emotion. That, in a sense, is it. When people say, oh, I don't even know why I'm feeling sad. Well, that's the opposite. But if exactly why you're feeling something, that's when we're on to a bit of meta. These are how we break it down into different parts. First of all, we've got the person. This is knowledge about oneself. Do you have that knowledge? Do yourself what works for you, not what works for you? Then you've got the task, knowledge about the demands of different tasks. For instance, say you're going rock climbing, you are fully aware that you're going to need some safety equipment. You have been able to think about the task in hand. Strategies, knowing which strategy is likely to be useful. Again, if you're going rock climbing, you might have all the gear, but if you're just like on the rock face, you're not going to get anywhere. All it does is essentially knowledge, but it is the knowledge that you possess and what to do with that knowledge. Our world, we have loads of knowledge lurking about, but that doesn't mean we're actually able to put it to good use. I always take this back to when you're in maths and you're learning algebra. You're like, what is the point of this? And the reason we really struggle with that is because we need to implement our knowledge, being able to see how it integrates with real life scenarios. More abstract concepts can be often quite challenging for a lot of us. This little GIF just says, if thinking of thinking is called metacognition, then what is thinking of metacognition called? I don't know. You can go down that rabbit hole again and again and again and again. But even still, it's an interesting concept. For any of you that do meditation or mindfulness, that essentially is it. This is just the scientific name. On here, this isn't working. I'll try something else. This might seem a really simple phrase, but actually there's a lot going on here. First of all, your brain is busy planning. We're also got monitoring. We've done the plan, let's see if it's working. Then we're reevaluating. Even when individuals are like, I don't know why this isn't working, I'm going to try something else. The brain is actually doing a lot of computation at this moment. It's really interesting. Even not knowing something, a lot is going on in your brain in order to understand that you do not know something. At very least, you can give yourself that credit. Put a little pin on your phone, if you're able to, on the frontal cortex. And this is involved in metacognition. I'll give a little hint. It's located in the area just behind the forehead. Yep, there we are. Lovely stuff. So absolutely right. That is the prefrontal cortex. When you get boshed on the head and you're like, I don't know where I am, I'm a bit confused right now. Not surprising, because this is the part that takes the impact. And this is the part which essentially tells you that you are you. Without that, you might be able to breathe and talk, but it doesn't mean you're going to really understand yourself. The ability to know oneself, we are born with it. It's something that develops throughout our life. The question is, at what age does it develop? Although we're not going into it today, there's some really interesting studies on animals and metacognition. How do we know if an animal is smart or not? We can't really ask them in the way that we do. One of the tests that they use is they hold a mirror up. If an animal was like a dog, would be like, oh my God, there's another dog in the mirror. Woof, 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 woof. That dog is not very aware. If an elephant is in front of the mirror, it'll be waving with its trunk. It knows that it is a reflection of itself. Dolphins, I think they also know they're a reflection. Chimpanzees, they know it's a reflection. But a lot of animals, they just think it's another animal. That is like a fun way of doing it. Children as well are the same. As we get older, we realize, oh, that reflection is me. But when you're really young, oh my God, there's another baby. Let's see. Okay, interesting. It is around about 5. I would say probably 3 to 7 is the average age where people develop that self-awareness. If any of you have heard of global development delay or some other neurodevelopment conditions, this quite commonly can take a little bit longer because developmental delay, things take longer. But we are looking at around about 5 when children start to question. We all know when the child reaches that age where they're like, why, it's annoying, but also it's really interesting because what does that actually mean? It means that they're not taking things face value. They're starting to dive deeper into it. How do you think about thinking? So for example, using a checklist, you are ultimately thinking about thinking because you are writing a list to help you keep track. Explaining your thoughts, when you are going, okay, yes, how am I going to do this? You are also thinking about thinking. Questionnaires, just when you're looking at errors and tasks, doing a bit of scan reading. Or we've got judge your learning and performance. When you are actually thinking, is this working for me? Is it not working? Why is it going well? What can I do better? We might just call this reviewing, but there's actually more going on under the hood than we first realized. Okay, so the leaderboard at the moment is explain your thoughts. We know, especially in school systems, that comprehension is a really big thing. It's all well and good to be able to read, but do you understand what you're reading? And that's often one of the biggest challenges with dyslexia. Our brain is spending so long actually trying to read the words that we're not able to also comprehend it at the same time. One does not equal the other. You might do something, but it doesn't mean you understand what you're doing. It doesn't mean that you comprehend what you're doing or you're able to reevaluate what you're doing. Oh, Alex says, I read recently that people with ADHD, their PFC may not fully develop until up to the age of 35. Not sure on its legitimacy, but found it interesting. I have heard similar things. In terms of our brain fully develops, it's always going, but definitely early age is the real core part of development. They often say that, isn't it, around 25 is when our bodies stop growing roughly for males and females. But truthfully, our brains are always growing. They never stop. Always in our brains, they're dying, they're getting stronger, they're rerouting. While it happens less the older you get, you're still doing it. This is exactly how I felt about my brain, 45 and still developing. Yes, absolutely. This is why when you see a 90-year-old has just got their master degree. Well, absolutely. You can still learn, but the brain is what we call plastic or plasticity. And that means its ability to shape and move. The older plastic gets, the more brittle it gets and the harder it is for it to move. Possible, just more challenging. But yeah, thanks everyone for your opinions and comments. out of these types of what ones do you often use? Now, I know the term metacognition might be a little bit unfamiliar to you, but I'm sure all these ways of learning are not new to you. Are you the type of person who sets small, manageable goals that you can easily tick, tick, tick? Are you the type of person who's really good at managing time and able to think in advance? What about saying when you do not understand something? And this is something that I found really interesting because when I work at schools with individuals who have high needs autism, while they may struggle with a lot of these other types of metacognition, they are normally able to say, hey, I am not understanding this. And I don't think we give that as much credit as it deserves. To say you do not understand something is saying that you are thinking about learning. Not knowing is actually pretty impressive even in itself. That might be a quote one day, who knows? Talking about what you're doing. Yeah, so do you talk it through either to yourself, like, okay, I'm going to do the washing, going to do that, or do you talk to other people as a sounding board? Making plans, nice, taking notes, checking if you're understanding. Quite often, we don't always stop to check if we know what we're doing ourselves. It's why planning is essential. I'm sure some of you have I don't know if, is it a fable or not, or analogy? I don't know. But the idea of a woodsman, he goes in the forest and he's cutting down a tree. There's two individuals. One person who starts cutting straight away, the other one who's sharpening their blade. While sharpening the blade takes a lot longer than just starting, ultimately, that individual finishes first because their blade is super sharp that can cut down the tree in only 2 swipes, where the person who started straight away is taking them a lot longer because they've got a blunt blade. And that is what we're doing here. Are we just going ahead with something without fully comprehending it? Or are we taking our time to sharpen the blade? And I do think neurodivergent people are experts at sharpening the blade. We are bloody slow, don't get me wrong. Like, we are taking years to sharpen that blade. But once we got it really nice and sharp, there's no stopping us. We're a snowball. We'll just keep on going and achieve and achieve and achieve. I think the key challenge here is in that time it takes to sharpen our internal blade, we are being put down. Society is stepping on us, like making us feel awful about ourselves. And that, I would say, in my opinion, is what creates a disability. Some of us take longer to learn, others take less time to learn, but ultimately it's the processing behind the learning which is more important. Otherwise, you're just someone who is able to regurgitate information. We always say that about the education system. They teach you to remember. They don't teach you to understand. And a lot of neurodiverse individuals need to understand, or they can't move on. You might tell me something, but unless my brain has fully comprehended it, I'm going to forget about it. You can see how it's just a different type of learning. I think it is honestly fascinating. Oh, Gregory has said, I often don't understand. I haven't worked out what it is I don't understand to be able to figure out what I need to ask to have be explained. I need to understand why, folks. Yeah, and that really is it. Individuals who aren't neurodiverse, they can learn something without truly understanding it and continue. When neurodivergent individuals, we need to really understand it before we can even think about moving forward. But the rest of society just sees that as, not very smart. Things are changing slowly. Oh, I wrote so many jokes by needing something explained. Yeah, I mean, I will say humor is a tough one because that requires. What I love about humor, and this is a bit of a thing, is what is humor? Humor is when the brain is confused. Humor is the lack of metacognition and the brain trying to work it out. So, for instance, this is a terrible joke, but why did the girl fall off the swing? Because she had no arms. That is funny to some people. I mean, because it makes no sense. Like, okay, it's when the brain short wires, when there's a gap in the knowledge. Humor is the brain laughing at itself for not understanding. Where a neurodivergent person, we want to know. We aren't going to laugh straight away. We're going to dissect it. But by the time we've dissected it, people have moved on. It's no longer funny. I think the joke changes. Oh, what else have we got here? I think this is why when I'm explaining something to someone else, I go into a lot of detail and context. My partner calls it world building. Nice. It's just verbal diarrhea to me. Yeah, that is definitely what I always got told I had. Depending how you word it though, one sounds better than the other. Next thing is, when have you actually used this metacognitive knowledge? I want to know, it sounds good in principle, but how does it translate to real life? So when in life have thinking about thinking been beneficial? Now, to make this a bit simpler, on the side here, we've got, remember, it's knowledge of task, knowledge of strategy, knowledge of self. When have having knowledge of any of these three things actually been useful? Yep, well-being, I think having a check-in, preparation for exam, again, sharpening the blade. If you're sharpening the blade because that sharper blade is going to cut a tree down faster, but if you didn't know that, you might as well be doing anything else at your downtime. Revision, a lot of these things is about preparation, isn't it? Well-being isn't about fixing a problem, it's about preventing a problem. Again, preparation. Preparing for an exam, preparation, organizing is about making your life easier in the future. All of these things is sharpening the blade or sharpening the sword and looking over ahead. Great. I think hopefully we all know what metacognition is now. It's knowing about knowing and thinking about thinking in order for future success. Let's look at some learning strategies. If we know what we know and we know what we don't know, are there ways which we can enhance our strategies? This is a tiny little image, but essentially it shows you the different levels of thinking. So I'm going to go through them because I think it's quite an interesting little image. We've got, first of all, writing on paper or pause for reflection. Super simple, but that is a type of processing. We've got self-assessments, thinking pairs, peer reviews, brainstorming, and apparently the absolute creme de la creme of understanding oneself is experimental learning. So physically going somewhere, forum theaters, inquiry learning. I don't know if any of you do any of these, but it does show you that in order to understand, we need to push ourselves. When you're saying, I'm writing things down, but I'm not understanding, maybe you need to push the way you understand things to a higher level. Example, if you're learning about Egypt, of course you could read it and write it down, but if you physically visit Egypt, well, that's going to be a way better way of learning. But if you physically visit Egypt, you're talking with someone about Egypt, it's about enhancing that experience and it allows the brain to comprehend that far better. Don't get me wrong, we can't all afford to go to Egypt, so we've got to pick what we're able to do. But it does show you that just because neurodivergent individuals struggle with learning, that doesn't mean we have a lack of intelligence. It normally means that the way that we are taught to retain information isn't comprehensive enough for us truly to understand all the caveats and nooks and crannies of the situation. It genuinely really changes the way you think. It at least does for me. It makes me reevaluate my whole education experience. Was I really worse than my peers, or was I just more analytical than my peers and I wanted more clarity than my peers? Here, I want you to select which learning styles you typically use. These are just a small handful of the type of ways that individuals learn, but knowing that not all of them are created equal and that different ones can have different benefit depending on the people. Are you someone who likes to explain things to yourself? Are you someone who prefers a good old summary at the end of your talk? Are you someone that loves highlighting, doodling, and scribbling all over your work? Do you spread out your study? I do a little bit today, I do a little bit tomorrow, or do you to cram? Do you test? Are you someone who reads again in order to really understand something? I know for myself, I will. I read it first with my dyslexic brain, just to try to break down the words. Once I'm actually able to read it, that's when I'll try to understand it. Creating mental pictures and using memory aids. Okay, nice. Looking like explaining to yourself and highlighting are the number one. I've got some interesting scientific findings for you around highlighting in a moment, which you may or may not believe, but I thought it was quite interesting. Anyway, before we get onto that, let's look at self-explanation. So this is when you internally explain to yourself. And I want you to select which one are you. Are you someone who's quite impulsive and just I'm not thinking about this, I'm just going to do it? Or are you someone who really wants to pull back the curtain and understand what you're doing before you do it? So here it says, okay, so I'm going to multiply these two numbers and write them one after the other and transposition fraction. So this individual, he is thinking about what he is doing in order to get the outcome. Whereas this individual, they are like, I just know how I do it. If you do the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that song, you're not thinking about it. The brain is automatically doing it at this point. But if you think A, B, C, you are thinking about what one comes next. There's different types of learning, and one doesn't necessarily have to be better than the other, even though personally, I think self-explaining is better. But for some people, both work. Okay, nice. So I can see we've got a nice mixture here. Personally, for me, I think it depends on the situation. It's not one size fits all. Sometimes I'm impulsive and I do not think. Other times I do think. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if any of you watched it on Netflix. They've got not the Hunger Games, the Squid Games challenge. It's just come out, and it's real life Squid Games, and it shows a lot of people. So there are some individuals who just do without thinking, and there are others who take a bit more of a passive role, are really trying to understand before they make these life-changing decisions. Going back to highlighting, because a lot of you said you do highlight words, do you think this helps in learning? And the interesting thing about this is studies have shown no benefit. And you're like, what? It benefits me? So I'm curious to know how to really understand this. I think if it works for you, it works for you. I don't know how these studies can fully understand if it benefits. I think they've done studies of people who did or didn't highlight and they got the same result. Ultimately, I think just do what you think works best for you, but be careful not to procrastinate. I would say when it comes to highlighting, for me, I do it to make my image look colorful and pretty. Sometimes I spend way too long on the prettiness and not enough on actually trying to fully understand it. So maybe that is where this study is coming from. Apparently, it doesn't help. Not my words, a study's words. Okay, what we got? I end up highlighting half the book. Nice. Same here. Very much depending on the situation. Over time, I learned to pause. It helps me processing rather than the final result. Okay. I highlight keywords so that if I need to reread it, I can go straight to it. Highlighting words for me because it means identify different color pens help as well. Helps me to focus. A lot of you are like, you know what? Screw you, study. I don't care. And I think that's fine. It's just interesting that they found when they compared it, they didn't necessarily see any benefit. Some of our methods of understanding don't necessarily correlate to actual performance. I don't think that means you should necessarily stop doing it though. Yeah, individual case by case. And why do we study? This is another question which seems obvious, but also interesting. Are you the type of person who like, what? It's going to be fine. Night before, la 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 la, or are you the person who does little and often? This isn't going to come to a surprise to many of you, but cramming the night before does not work according to the studies. The reason is because you've got long-term memory, short-term memory, and short-term memory is essentially cramming the night before. You are holding onto that information, but your brain is not holding onto it and it is evaporating out the way. But long-term memory is the information that your brain knows is going to be useful. It makes a lot of sense because, for instance, there is so much going on in life. If we remember everything equally, our brains are going to be overloaded with information and it's going to be really inefficient in order to draw that information back. In a computer, you've got your long-term memory, your storage, which keeps your files. When you want to access those files, it's slow, but they're always there. RAM, on the other hand, really quick. You want something, there you go. But it doesn't keep hold of it for a long time. Yeah, interesting. Studies have shown that little and often works. It's essentially, another analogy I'll use is building a house. If you just like brick, the house will fall over because it hasn't had time to set. But if you lay a brick, let it dry, put a new brick on, let it dry, you're able to build up a stronger foundation. The same works for our brain. Little and often is telling our brain, hey, this is something that I'm going to need for a long time. If you keep this in the short-term memory, it's going to waste both of our time because I'm only going to have to relearn it again in the future. If you are struggling to learn something, you need to ask yourself, why is this staying into my short-term memory? Why does my brain think this isn't needed for the future? And maybe there's things you can do to mitigate that. Yes, Anna says that's what happens with ADHD. Absolutely right. ADHD needs deadlines, pressure, and it does work for different people. And again, with ADHD, without going on too much of a tangent, that's to do with the dopamine. When there's that pressure, the brain's loving it. It's like, woo, work. And when there isn't that pressure, there's a lack of motivation. So you can see why there's a challenge here, because science has proven that little and often does equal better results. But ADHD is saying, nah, this ain't working for me. You can see why people with ADHD may struggle in education because their natural way of learning doesn't directly relate to the proven way of retaining information for a long period of time. This isn't giving any of you an answer, but it is help explaining why there may be difficulties. Little and often is best, but why? It helps us remember things for a long time, so our long-term memory. Each session builds upon the last, again, like that bricklaying analogy. Each one builds upon the last, and rather than just fast. Cramming can make you feel confident, but you do forget, like really likely. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm still going to cram because for me, I'm like, it's better than not doing anything. But it is being proven sometimes if you have done your studying the day before an exam or something, relax, watch some Netflix, go out for a walk. Additional study isn't going to equal additional success. It may just make you more stressed and anxious, which then could negatively impact you later on. Which learning strategy is most linked to metacognition? This question isn't as easy as you might first assume. When you ask yourself, when do I truly have that awareness of my awareness? Is it when you explain things to yourself? Is it highlighting important parts? Or is it study regular in short sessions? I thought you would all say this. When you think highlighting important parts, well, you could highlight without even thinking about it. But you could also highlight it with a very intense purpose, saying, well, I'm doing this for this reason. Studying in short sessions, well, you may be doing it because you understand that short and often is a better way of retaining information, or you may be doing it because you're bored and you just want to go away. You can see that different activities, while they may seem like you're using your metacognition, it doesn't mean you are. It's all about your understanding about why you are doing it. Eating vegetables just because is healthy, regardless of whether or not you understand why you're eating vegetables, but understanding why you're eating them for health benefits, that is truly understanding. We're finally onto the section of neuroeducation. Today, we have talked a lot about studies and science and different ways of learning. The big question is, why aren't we doing it? And from our previous session, we learned that it is still in the very early stages of understanding. Truthfully, we haven't been able to make a direct correlation between implementing neuroscience into mainstream education at this moment. But this little diagram shows you. So you've got neuroscience, psychology, and a word that I've really struggled to pronounce, pedagogy, or whatever. Essentially, that just means learning and education. When these are all combined, that is when you get neuroeducation. That is what we mean. This is just another image which basically says the same thing. Psychology, neuroscience, education, meet in the middle. That is neuroeducation. On here, I just want you to go left if you think I am referring to neuroscience, and right if you think I'm referring to neuroeducation, because they are different things. They might sound similar, but they are different. The first one we've got, the empirical study of the brain and connected nerve systems, and the enhancement of learning to improve educational outcomes. Yep, you all got it completely right. Nice and simple, but knowing the difference is key. One is studying, one is improving outcomes. The biggest concern on why we don't even do this currently, or not really, is as followed. I want you to rank how much of a concern you think all of these may be. We've got need artificial context. What do I mean by that? Well, you try telling someone about the brain cells, like, I can't see it. We're talking about things that you and me will never ever see. Neurons, synapses, neurotransmitters, glia. These are concepts because we are not able to see or hold them. We are told they are real, but we cannot see it. That makes education quite difficult because you already need to have quite a high level of understanding in order to understand something that you can't touch. Then we've got vocabulary. All these words, you watching me, I study this and I can barely pronounce any of this. They're really difficult to read. This puts up barriers for individuals, which means while we might be able to implement these learnings, it doesn't mean we're truly going to understand it. You can see already in the education system, do we use metacognition in the education system? Do we do things because we are told to do them, or do we do them because we truly understand the benefit that is attached to them? Difficult to scale due to costs. Neuroscience is expensive. All these gadgets and gazmos and MRIs and ERGs, they're expensive. Currently, we do not know enough about the brain. Believe it or not, this is very much true. We don't know. All of these are the potential roadblocks to, even though this sounds really interesting, why aren't we doing this? There are some roadblocks in the way. However, there is hope. New designs can help neuroscience studies, so we are growing all the time in this area. Neuroscience clarifies educational research. Sometimes it's saying, actually, teachers, what you are doing is actually beneficial. Let's take the highlighting, for example. All your teachers might be saying, use highlighters. As we've all said, if it works for you, it works for you. But if studies have shown that actually it's not the best approach, maybe we should recommend it slightly less, or at least tell students the jury is out on this. Direct funds for better brains and educational understandings. The more we learn about things, the more likely we're able to get additional funding for it. Because why would our governments ever fund neuroeducation if we're not able to back up the findings? Just to finish off with, if any of you thought this was darn interesting and I'd love to learn a little bit additional, these are some of the books that I've done. Essentially, just type in the name and the date and it will come up. I didn't bother with the whole academic referencing. You'll find it. But some interesting studies nevertheless. If any of you are like, you know what, I may or may not be neurodivergent. I don't know if I have autism. I don't know if I have ADHD. But I do know that I struggle with metacognition. I do struggle with understanding or moving forward without the correct information. That would mean that the way your brain is wired isn't necessarily how the rest of society has developed and grown, and you would be entitled to a workplace needs assessment in order to get additional support in the workplace. The key takeaway here is, if you want support in the workplace, you do not have to have a diagnosis. You just have to resonate with the characteristics that are associated with those who have different neurology compared to the majority of the population. A very wordy way of explaining it, but I think it's the most inclusive way. But for next week, we are doing a history of neuroscience. And I think this is going to be a really interesting one. We've talked a lot about how neuroscience is really beneficial, but we've come a long way. Just like the other week, we were cutting brains open. Nowadays, we're doing scans. So we are going to be looking how we used to steal corpses, cut them up, look at their brains, to when we first found MRI machines, to when we first understood what a neuron was, when we were able to first photograph it. I think it will show us how far we've come in such a short amount of time. And it will also set a really good foundation for the future as well. As always, do sign up to our YouTube channel. Just click the link and you can see all our previous videos. And here's our contact details if you do want to get in contact. I just want to say hello. We are done for the day, but thanks again, everyone, for attending. Really loved the interaction. Hope you found it useful, at least got the mind thinking.